My husband emptied our son's surgery fund and disappeared with his secretary. I was shattered until my 8-year-old looked up from his cereal and said, "Don't worry, Mom, I already fixed it." 3 days later, Howard called me screaming after he discovered what Kyle had done to his entire life.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tell us a duh.
Howard was throwing files into a cardboard box when I walked into his home office. Papers scattered across the floor, his desk drawers yanked open and emptied, like he was fleeing a crime scene. The methodical way he sorted through documents, keeping some and discarding others, made my stomach clench with dread. "What are you doing?" I asked from the doorway, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't look up from the box he was packing. "What I should have done months ago, Crystal." The words hit me like ice water. 15 years of marriage, and this was how it ended? Him stuffing important papers into a cardboard box while I stood there in my work clothes, having just returned from Kyle's latest doctor's appointment at Children's Hospital. "Howard, stop!" I stepped into the room, my heels clicking against the hardwood. "Talk to me. What's happening?" He finally raised his head, and what I saw in his eyes made my knees weak. Nothing. No guilt, no explanation, no recognition of the life we'd built together. Just cold efficiency, like I was a stranger interrupting his work. "I'm leaving today, Crystal. This afternoon." The room seemed to tilt sideways. Yesterday morning, we'd sat at Kyle's bedside while Dr. Morrison explained the timeline for his surgery. Yesterday, Howard held my hand during the consultation about the $180,000 procedure our son needed to correct his spinal curvature. Yesterday, we were partners facing our child's medical crisis together. "Is this about Kyle's condition?" The question tumbled out before I could stop it. "Are you having trouble handling the stress?" Howard paused, a manila folder halfway into his box. For just a moment, something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe, or recognition of what he was abandoning. Then it was gone, replaced by that same cold determination. "This isn't about Kyle. This is about me needing to start over." But I knew better. The way he'd been working late for months, claiming the accounting firm needed him for special projects, the way his phone had become permanently face down on every surface. The new cologne, the gym membership he'd suddenly acquired, the way he'd started pressing his shirts with military precision every morning. "Where will you go?" My voice sounded small, pathetic even to my own ears. "I'll figure it out." He sealed the box with packing tape, the sound sharp and final in the quiet room. "I need you to sign some papers transferring the medical savings account into my name, just temporarily, while I get things sorted." That's when the real terror set in. Not just abandonment, but our son's future. Kyle's surgery was scheduled for next month. The $180,000 we'd scraped together over 3 years, working double shifts and skipping vacations and eating pasta for dinner more nights than I could count. I ran downstairs, my heels clicking frantically against the stairs. Kyle looked up from his homework at the kitchen table, his small frame bent carefully over a math worksheet. At 8 years old, he'd already learned to move cautiously, conscious of the metal brace that kept his spine aligned until surgery could correct the curve that threatened to compress his lungs. "Mom, you look scared," he said, setting down his pencil with the deliberate movements that characterized everything he did. "Is something wrong with my surgery?" "No, sweetheart. Just some grown-up stuff to figure out." The lie tasted better, but I couldn't burden him with this, not when he was already carrying so much. I grabbed my laptop from the counter and logged into our bank accounts with shaking fingers. The medical savings account loaded first. The screen showed $847.22. Not $180,000. Not even close to the amount that should have been there. The joint checking account, $156.90. Our emergency fund, $0. Kyle's special medical credit account, the one we'd established specifically for his surgical expenses, closed. No, The word came out as a whisper. No, no, no. I refreshed the page 3 times. The numbers didn't change. I checked the transaction history with trembling fingers. 2 days ago, while I'd been at Kyle's physical therapy appointment, Howard had methodically transferred everything. Not just his half of our shared accounts, but Kyle's medical fund, our son's chance at a normal life. The clicking of Howard's dress shoes on the stairs made us both look up. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, carrying his cardboard box and a small suitcase I'd never seen before. He walked past us like we were furniture, heading straight for the back door that led to the garage.
That's it? I found my voice, and it was stronger than I expected. 15 years and you're just walking away? He stopped with his hand on the doorknob. I left you a detailed email explaining everything. Check your inbox tonight. I don't want an email. I want you to look at your son and explain why you're abandoning him 3 weeks before his surgery. Kyle stood up slowly from the kitchen table, using both hands to push himself upright the way Dr. Morrison had taught him to avoid putting pressure on his curved spine. He didn't cry, didn't run to his father, didn't beg him to stay. He just watched with those intelligent brown eyes that had always been too serious for his age. Howard glanced at Kyle for maybe 2 seconds. "You'll understand when you're older, buddy." Then he looked at me. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. I'll call in a few days when things settle down." The door closed behind him with a quiet click that somehow sounded louder than if he'd slammed it. Kyle and I stood in the sudden silence of our kitchen. The microwave hummed. The refrigerator cycled on. Outside, a car engine started and backed out of our driveway. "Is Daddy coming back?" Kyle asked, his voice small but steady. I wanted to lie, to protect him, to say that Daddy just needed some time to think. But looking at his face, I realized he already knew the answer. Children who live with chronic pain develop a different relationship with harsh realities. "I don't think so, baby." Kyle nodded, processing this information with the same careful consideration he used for everything else in his life. He walked to the kitchen window and watched through the blinds as Howard's car disappeared down Maple Street. Did he take the surgery money too? The question caught me off guard. How could an 8-year-old even think to ask that? "Some of it," I said carefully, not sure how much truth he could handle. "All of it?" I couldn't speak. I just nodded. Kyle walked back to the kitchen table and gathered his homework papers into a neat stack. He put his pencils back in their case and zipped his backpack with the same methodical precision he used for everything. Then he turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before on his young face. "Mom, don't worry, I already fixed it." The words were so unexpected, so calmly delivered, that I almost laughed. Fixed what? He was 8 years old with a spinal condition that required surgery we could no longer afford. What could he possibly have fixed? But something in his tone made me pause. There was no childish bravado, no empty comfort meant to make me feel better. Just quiet confidence, like he knew something I didn't. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Kyle picked up his backpack and headed toward the stairs. "I need to finish something on my computer before bedtime. We'll talk tomorrow, okay?" And then he was gone, climbing the stairs with his careful, measured steps, leaving me alone in a kitchen that suddenly felt enormous and empty, with questions I couldn't answer and a future I couldn't see. The house felt different without Howard's presence, but not empty, watchful somehow, like secrets were hiding in every corner waiting to reveal themselves. That first night without Howard felt like living in a stranger's house. Every familiar object seemed foreign. His coffee mug still sat in the dishwasher. His reading glasses lay abandoned on the nightstand. The morning alarm was still set for 6:30 a.m., the time he used to wake up for his commute to Bradford and Associates Accounting. I couldn't sleep. At 3:17 a.m., I crept downstairs to our home office and opened Howard's desktop computer. His password had always been Kyle 2016, the year our son was born. The screen lit up, showing his usual desktop wallpaper of Kyle's first baseball game before the spinal curvature had been diagnosed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I clicked on our joint banking website, my heart hammering against my ribs. The page loaded with agonizing slowness, and when it finally appeared, I stared at numbers that made no sense. Medical savings account, $847.22. Joint checking, $156.90. Emergency fund, $0. Kyle's surgical fund, account closed. I refreshed the page, certain there was some mistake. The numbers remained unchanged. 18 months of working overtime at the dental clinic, 2 years of Howard taking weekend consulting jobs, 3 years of skipping family vacations and buying generic groceries and patching Kyle's school clothes instead of replacing them. All gone. I clicked through to the transaction history, my hands shaking so violently I could barely control the mouse. There it was, dated 3 days ago at 2:47 p.m. While I'd been at Kyle's physical therapy session, Howard had systematically transferred every penny we'd saved for our son's surgery. The largest transfer, $167,000 to an account I didn't recognize. Smaller transfers, various amounts to checking accounts with only partial numbers visible. Final transfer, $8,400 to something labeled Corvinus Travel Agency. I called our bank's emergency line, knowing it was futile, but needing to hear someone confirm this nightmare was real. The automated system put me on hold for 17 minutes. When a human finally answered, I could barely speak through my tears. "Ma'am, I show that Mr. Howard Sykes had full authorization for all transfers from your joint accounts," the representative said in a bored tone. "All transactions were completed with proper authentication." "But he stole my son's surgery money," I whispered. I understand this is distressing, but legally, joint account holders have equal access to all funds unless specific restrictions are in place. After I hung up, I sat in Howard's office chair, surrounded by the debris of his hasty departure. Medical bills were scattered across his desk, Kyle's treatment schedule, insurance pre-authorization forms, a sticky note in Howard's handwriting that read, "Crystal, surgery date confirmed, March 15th. March 15th, 6 weeks away. The date Dr. Morrison had circled in red on our calendar, warning us that Kyle's condition would worsen rapidly if we delayed the procedure beyond spring. I heard footsteps on the stairs, slow and careful. Kyle appeared in the doorway, wearing his Batman pajamas and the back brace that kept his spine stable during sleep. "Mom, why are you crying?" I quickly closed the laptop screen, but Kyle had already seen enough. He walked into the office with those deliberate steps, gripping the doorframe for balance before settling into the chair across from Howard's desk. "Dad took the surgery money, didn't he?" The direct question stunned me. How could an 8-year-old even think to connect his father's disappearance with their medical savings? "Some of it," I said carefully, not wanting to burden him with the full scope of our disaster. "All of it?" I couldn't speak. I just nodded. Kyle absorbed this information with the same quiet acceptance he showed when doctors delivered bad news about his condition. He'd learned early that life could be unpredictable and painful, that plans could change without warning. "Where did he go?" "I don't know, sweetheart. Daddy didn't say." Kyle reached across the desk and opened Howard's desk drawer, the one Howard had emptied into his cardboard box. Inside was a single item Howard had missed, a business card for Corvinus Travel Agency, with a handwritten note on the back, "J. Corvinus, Cancun package confirmed." My son handed me the card. He went to Mexico with his secretary. The certainty in his voice made me look at him more carefully. Kyle wasn't guessing. He wasn't asking a question. He was stating a fact. "Kyle, how do you know about a secretary?" "Jenny Corvinus from Dad's office. She calls our house sometimes when you're at work." My blood turned cold. "She calls here? When?" "After school, usually around 4 o'clock. Dad always takes the calls in his office and closes the door." Kyle adjusted his position carefully, favoring his left side where the brace rubbed against his ribs. "Last week, she called while Dad was in the shower, so I answered." "What did she say?" She asked if the March plans were still happening and if Dad had talked to you about the situation yet. When I said I didn't know what she meant, she got nervous and hung up. I stared at my 8-year-old son, who'd apparently been aware of things I'd missed completely. Children who spend time alone due to medical limitations often become more observant, more attuned to adult conversations and hidden tensions. Kyle, why didn't you tell me about these phone calls? I was trying to figure out what they meant first. He pulled himself up from the chair, using the armrests for support. I wanted to be sure before I told you something that might make you worry. There was something in his tone, the same quiet confidence he'd shown that morning when he said he'd already fixed things. Like he knew more than he was saying. Sweetheart, what exactly do you mean when you say you already fixed it? Kyle paused at the office doorway, his small hand gripping the frame. I found Dad's secret email account 2 weeks ago. I've been reading his messages with Jenny. The casual way he said it made my stomach drop. Kyle, you've been reading Daddy's private emails? Not private, he corrected matter-of-factly. Private means it's personal but not wrong. Secret means it's hidden because it's bad. With that distinction delivered in his serious 8-year-old voice, Kyle headed upstairs to bed, leaving me alone with questions that multiplied faster than I could process them. How long had my son been conducting surveillance on his own father? What exactly had he discovered in those emails? And most importantly, what did he mean when he said he'd already fixed it? I sat in Howard's abandoned office until nearly 2 a.m., staring at the travel agency business card and trying to comprehend that my husband had planned a Mexican vacation with his secretary using money meant to save our son's life. The house creaked and settled around me, but from upstairs, I could hear the faint sound of Kyle's computer. Soft clicking, steady and purposeful. He was awake, working on something I couldn't begin to understand. For the first time since Howard had walked out, I felt something other than despair. I felt curious. And underneath that curiosity, a growing suspicion that my 8-year-old son might be far more capable than anyone had ever imagined. The week that followed Howard's departure passed in a blur of phone calls to insurance companies, frantic emails to Dr. Morrison's office, and sleepless nights spent researching medical loans with impossible interest rates. Kyle maintained his school routine with mechanical precision, as if his father's abandonment was just another appointment to schedule around. Every morning at 7:15, Kyle would appear in the kitchen fully dressed, his back brace properly secured under his school uniform, his homework folder organized and ready. He'd eat his cereal without complaint, take his calcium supplements, and kiss my cheek goodbye with the same gentle formality he'd always shown. "Have a good day, Mom," he'd say, shouldering his specially designed backpack that distributed weight evenly across his shoulders. The same cheerful tone he'd used when we were still a complete family. It was unnerving. Where was the confusion, the questions about why Daddy had left, the anger that any normal child would feel? Instead, Kyle moved through our broken world like nothing fundamental had changed. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" I asked him one morning, catching his sleeve gently as he headed for the door. Kyle looked at me with those serious brown eyes that had always seemed too old for his face. "I'm fine, Mom. Are you?" The question caught me off guard. I wasn't fine. I was barely functioning, cycling between rage and despair, but I couldn't tell my 8-year-old son that his mother was falling apart. "Just checking on you, buddy." "I know." He patted my arm with his small hand. "But I really am okay. You don't need to worry about me right now." The maturity in his voice, the way he seemed to be comforting me instead of the other way around, made something twist in my chest. This wasn't how things were supposed to work. That evening, I decided to call my sister Barbara in Portland for advice. As I dialed, I could hear Kyle upstairs in his room. The sound drifted down through the floorboards, rapid typing, much faster than I'd ever heard from him before. I assumed he was chatting with school friends about the situation, maybe processing his feelings, the way kids do online now. "Crystal, honey, how are you holding up?" Barbara's voice carried that careful concern people use when they're not sure how broken you might be. "I don't know," I admitted, sinking onto the living room couch. Kyle's being incredibly strong, but I'm worried he's not processing what happened. He hasn't cried once. He barely asks questions about Howard. Some kids internalize trauma differently. Remember when mom and dad divorced? You sobbed for months, but I got obsessed with reorganizing my entire bedroom. Control responses. The typing upstairs suddenly stopped, then resumed with even more intensity. The rhythm was different now, purposeful, like someone working through a complex task rather than casual communication. "What's that sound?" Barbara asked. "Kyle's on his computer, probably homework or online games." But even as I said it, something felt off. The pattern was too focused, too sustained for games or homework, and it was nearly 9 p.m. on a school night. After hanging up with Barbara, I made Kyle's favorite dinner, grilled cheese cut into triangles and tomato soup, the same meal I'd served him during every illness or difficult day since he was a toddler. I knocked on his bedroom door around 7 p.m. "Come in," he called. Kyle was sitting at his desk, his laptop angled carefully away from the door. He closed the screen the moment I entered, but not before I glimpsed what looked like multiple windows open simultaneously, definitely not homework or games. "Brought you some dinner, sweetheart." "Thanks, Mom." He accepted the tray without making eye contact. "You can set it on my nightstand." As I placed the tray down, I glanced at Kyle's desk. His usual school supplies were arranged with military precision. Pencils in a neat row, textbooks stacked by size, his planner open to tomorrow's page. But tucked under his geography book was the corner of what looked like printed email pages. "What were you working on?" I asked casually. "Research project for Mrs. Wells' class. We're supposed to pick a career and learn about the daily responsibilities." Kyle reopened his laptop. And again, I caught a glimpse of the screen before he minimized whatever he'd been viewing. It definitely wasn't career research. The interface looked like email programs, multiple tabs open, data streaming across the screen. "What career did you pick?" "Computer security specialist." He opened what was clearly a school document, a PowerPoint about cybersecurity careers. "It's actually really interesting once you understand how information systems work." "Need any help with research?" "I'm good, thanks. I found some really detailed online tutorials." I was dismissed, politely but firmly. I kissed the top of his head and left, but the uneasy feeling followed me downstairs. Over the next few days, the pattern intensified. Kyle maintained his perfect school routine, while I spiraled deeper into panic about our financial situation. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. checking our empty bank accounts, calling Howard's number just to hear his voicemail, researching bankruptcy lawyers and medical charity programs. Meanwhile, Kyle would emerge each morning looking rested and composed, his homework completed, his uniform pressed, his demeanor unshakably calm. The typing continued every night. Sometimes it went on until nearly 11 p.m. Friday evening, I was folding Kyle's laundry when I saw them, 3 sheets of paper on his desk, partially hidden under his science textbook. I shouldn't have looked, but the letterhead caught my eye. Bradford and Associates Accounting, Howard's firm. My hands shook as I pulled the papers out. They were printed emails, a conversation between Howard and someone named Jay Corvinus at BradfordAssociates.com. The messages were dated from 2 weeks ago, before Howard had left. The content made my blood freeze. "Crystal suspects something. We need to move the timeline up." "How much can you transfer without triggering alerts?" "All of it. She never checks the accounts. By the time she realizes, we'll be in Cancun." "What about Kyle's surgery?" "Medical tourism. We can get it done in Mexico for a fraction of the cost. She'll figure something out." I sat down hard on Kyle's bed, staring at evidence that my 8-year-old son had somehow accessed his father's private business correspondence. How was that even possible? "Mom?" Kyle's voice from the doorway made me jump. He stood there holding his empty dinner plate, looking at me with those calm, assessing eyes. No panic at being caught, no embarrassment about his activities, just quiet observation. "Kyle, where did this come from?" He set his plate down and closed his bedroom door behind him. Then he walked to his closet and pulled out a plastic storage container I'd never seen before. "Dad uses the same password for everything," he said simply,
setting the container on his bed. Kyle 2016. His email, his work computer, even his banking apps. The container was filled with printed emails, bank statements, screenshots, and handwritten notes in Kyle's careful second-grade printing. Documents I couldn't begin to understand, but that clearly represented weeks of systematic investigation. How long have you been doing this? Since I figured out that Jenny wasn't just Dad's work friend. Kyle opened his laptop and showed me a browser window with multiple email accounts logged in simultaneously. Howard's personal Gmail, his work account, and something called a secure messaging app I'd never heard of. Kyle, how did you learn to do this? YouTube tutorials mostly, and the public library has some good books about computer security. He scrolled through what appeared to be a comprehensive digital surveillance operation. Mrs. Wells taught us about research methods for our career project. I just applied those methods to Dad. I stared at my 8-year-old son, realizing I might not know him at all. The plastic container held secrets I never could have imagined. Kyle sat beside me on his bed, opening it with the same careful precision he used for everything else. Inside were dozens of printed documents, organized in manila folders with labels written in his neat second-grade handwriting. Documents I couldn't begin to understand, but that clearly represented weeks of systematic investigation. How long have you been doing this? Since I figured out that Jenny wasn't just Dad's work friend. Kyle opened his laptop and showed me a browser window with multiple email accounts logged in simultaneously. Howard's personal Gmail, his work account, and something called a secure messaging app I'd never heard of. Kyle, how did you learn to do this? YouTube tutorials mostly, and the public library has some good books about computer security. He scrolled through what appeared to be a comprehensive digital surveillance operation. Mrs. Wells taught us about research methods for our career project. I just applied those methods to Dad. I stared at my 8-year-old son, realizing I might not know him at all. The plastic container held secrets I never could have imagined. Kyle sat beside me on his bed, opening it with the same careful precision he used for everything else. Inside were dozens of printed documents, organized in manila folders with labels written in his neat second-grade handwriting. Dad and Jenny messages, bank papers, secret accounts, Mexico trip plans. Kyle, this is incredible. How did you organize all this? I learned about evidence collection from a documentary about detectives. He pulled out the first folder. You have to keep everything in order, or it doesn't make sense when you need to prove something. The Dad and Jenny messages folder contained over 30 pages of printed email exchanges between Howard and Jenny Corvinus. The conversation spanned 3 months, starting with professional discussions about client accounts and gradually becoming personal, then intimate, then conspiratorial. Kyle, some of these messages are from after bedtime. When did you print all this?
I stay up late sometimes. My back hurts less when I sit at the computer than when I lie down. He said it matter-of-factly, like chronic pain was just another scheduling consideration. Dad never checks his email history, so he doesn't know I've been reading everything. I flipped through messages that revealed a relationship I'd been blind to completely. Howard and Jenny discussing meeting times at restaurants I'd never heard of. Plans for weekend trips while I thought Howard was working overtime. Detailed conversations about their future together and what to do about the Crystal and Kyle situation. This one's the worst, Kyle said quietly, pointing to an email dated 2 weeks ago. It was from Jenny to Howard. We need to be realistic about Kyle's medical expenses. Even if the surgery works, there will be years of follow-up treatments and physical therapy. That's money we could be investing in our new life together. Maybe it's time to consider other options. Howard's response made me physically ill. You're right. Crystal's too emotional about this. There are medical tourism options in Central America that cost a fraction of what they're charging here. Kyle will get his surgery, just not at the premium price. We can use the difference to start fresh. My hands shook holding the paper. They'd been planning to use Kyle's surgery fund for their escape while convincing themselves they were still providing for his medical needs through cheaper alternatives. How did reading this make you feel? I asked Kyle gently. Mad at first, he admitted, then sad. Then I decided to do something about it. What kind of something? Kyle opened the Secret Accounts folder. Inside were printed bank statements for accounts I'd never seen before, all bearing Howard's name, but with addresses I didn't recognize. Dad's been hiding money from us for a long time, Mom, not just the surgery fund. He has 3 different savings accounts you don't know about. The statements showed regular deposits over the past 18 months, amounts I recognized, Howard's consulting payments, tax refunds, even my overtime pay from the dental clinic that he'd convinced me to deposit into our shared emergency fund. Kyle, how did you find these accounts? Dad's browser saves all his passwords. When I use his computer for school projects, I can see everywhere he's been logged in. Kyle turned to a page covered with handwritten notes. He's been planning this for a year and a half. The affair with Jenny started right after Dr. Morrison said I needed surgery. The timeline hit me like a physical blow. Howard's betrayal hadn't been impulsive. He'd been systematically preparing to abandon his disabled son the moment the medical bills became real. But, sweetheart, what did you mean when you said you already fixed it? Kyle smiled for the first time since Howard had left. Not his usual gentle smile, but something sharper, more satisfied. I learned about identity protection at the library. Mrs. Smith in the computer lab taught me how to set up fraud alerts and account monitors. He opened his laptop and showed me a screen filled with official-looking notifications. I reported Dad's hidden accounts to the bank fraud department on Monday. You reported your own father? I reported someone stealing from a disabled child's medical fund. The bank doesn't know it's my dad unless I tell them. Kyle's logic was flawless and terrifying. All his secret accounts are frozen now, pending investigation. I stared at the fraud alerts, each one representing a different account Howard had been hiding from us. My 8-year-old son had systematically dismantled his father's financial escape plan while I'd been crying into my coffee every morning. Kyle, I struggled for words. This is incredibly smart, but also really serious. What you're doing, it's like detective work. Detective work helps catch bad guys, Kyle said simply. Dad's a bad guy now. He stole from sick kids. He pointed to his medical brace. That makes him a bad guy. The clear moral framework in his voice was both impressive and heartbreaking. Kyle had processed his father's betrayal through the lens of right and wrong, with no gray areas for confusion or misplaced loyalty. Is there more? Kyle nodded and pulled out the Mexico trip plans folder. Inside were printed confirmations for flights, hotel reservations, and car rentals, all for 2 people traveling to Cancun next week. They're leaving on Tuesday. First-class tickets, 5-star resort, private car service. Kyle's finger traced the printed itinerary. The total cost is $14,000. That's enough to cover my physical therapy for 6 months after surgery. How did you access their travel plans? Jenny used Dad's credit card to book everything. I can see all his credit card activity because he never logs out of his banking apps. Kyle closed the folder carefully. But here's the thing, Mom. They can't actually go. What do you mean? Kyle opened his laptop again and navigated to what appeared to be airline websites. I canceled their reservations yesterday. Both flights, the hotel, the car service, everything. My mouth fell open. Kyle, you can't just cancel other people's travel plans. I can if they're using stolen money to pay for them. His tone remained matter-of-fact. I also reported the credit card charges as unauthorized purchases. Dad's credit cards are all frozen now, too. I stared at my 8-year-old son, realizing he'd been conducting a comprehensive financial warfare campaign while I'd been paralyzed by grief and shock. Sweetheart, what you've accomplished is amazing, but I'm scared about what this means. You're 8 years old. This kind of responsibility, this level of revenge, it's not something children should have to handle. Kyle looked at me with those serious eyes. Mom, what Dad did isn't something that should happen to children either, but it did happen, so now we deal with it. The calm authority in his voice sent chills down my spine. This wasn't my little boy anymore. This was someone I'd never met before. Someone calculating and focused and completely unafraid. "What happens next?" I asked. Kyle saved his work and closed the laptop. Now we wait for Dad to figure out that his perfect plan isn't working anymore. The next morning, Kyle asked me to sit down at the kitchen table after breakfast. He'd arranged his folders in a neat row, each one labeled with his careful handwriting. Behind him, his laptop was open to what looked like a presentation screen. "Mom, I need to show you everything I found," he said, his voice carrying that same serious tone he used when discussing his medical appointments. "Some of it's going to make you really upset." "Kyle, honey, maybe this isn't something you should—" "It is something I should," he interrupted me gently but firmly. "Because you're my mom, and you need to know what Dad was really planning." He opened the first folder and spread out papers across our kitchen table. Bank statements, printed emails, photographs taken with what must have been his tablet camera. The evidence was overwhelming and meticulously organized. "It started 3 weeks ago, when Dad forgot to log out of his email on the family computer," Kyle explained, pointing to a screenshot. "I was supposed to research rainforests for Mrs. Wells' class, but when I opened the browser, Dad's email was still logged in." The screen showed an inbox full of messages from jcorvinus@bradfordassociates.com. Even from a distance, I could see subject lines that made my stomach clench. Timeline confirmation, financial transfer schedule, Mexico property options. "I wasn't trying to spy," Kyle continued, "but Jenny's name was on half the messages, and I remembered her calling our house. So I read one email to see if it was about work." He handed me a printed message dated 4 weeks ago. "Howard, my father approved the Mexico City condo purchase. Wire transfer needs to be completed by month end to secure the property. Have you talked to Crystal about Kyle's alternative treatment options yet? We can't keep stalling on this. Jenny." "Alternative treatment options?" I whispered. Kyle opened his laptop and showed me a medical tourism website bookmarked in Howard's browser. Dad was researching spine surgery in Mexico. The cost is $23,000 instead of $180,000. But Dr. Morrison said Kyle's case requires specialized equipment that's only available in major medical centers. "I know. I read Dr. Morrison's emails too." Kyle's voice remained steady. "Dad forwarded all my medical records to a clinic in Tijuana. They said they could probably fix my spine for much less money." The word "probably" hung in the air like a poisoned cloud. Howard had been willing to gamble with our son's life to fund his escape with his secretary. "Kyle, how did you get into Dr. Morrison's emails?" "Dad has access to the patient portal. He forwards all my medical information to his personal email so he can stay informed." Kyle made air quotes around the phrase. "But he was really forwarding everything to Jenny so she could help him find cheaper options." Kyle opened another folder, labeled Jenny's Secrets. Inside were printouts that made my blood run cold. Employment records showing Jenny had been fired from 2 previous accounting firms for unauthorized access to client funds. Court documents from a lawsuit filed by elderly clients who'd lost their retirement savings. A bankruptcy filing from 2019. Jenny Corvinus isn't just Dad's secretary, Mom. She's been stealing money from old people for years. My hands shook as I read document after document. Jenny had a pattern of targeting older, trusting clients with complex financial portfolios. She'd manipulate account statements, create fake investment opportunities, and gradually siphon money into personal accounts. How did you find all this? Public records are available online if you know where to look. I learned about database searches at the library. Kyle opened his laptop to show me multiple government websites. Mrs. Smith in the computer lab taught me how to research people's backgrounds for the career project. The irony was staggering. Kyle's school assignment about career research had led him to uncover a criminal conspiracy that I'd been completely blind to. But Kyle, this level of investigation, learning these computer skills, when did you have time for all this? At night, when my back hurts too much to sleep, and during lunch at school when other kids play outside. Kyle adjusted his position carefully, favoring his left side. I can't run around like them anyway because of my brace, so I use the computer lab. The casual way he described his isolation broke my heart. While other children played at recess, my son had been alone in the computer lab, learning skills that would save our family. Show me what else you found. Kyle opened the secret accounts folder and spread out bank statements that revealed the full scope of Howard's deception. 5 different accounts, each containing money that should have been in our family savings. The total was staggering, over $200,000. Dad's been hiding money for 2 years, not just recently. Every time you worked overtime at the clinic, every time he got consulting payments, every time we got tax refunds or insurance reimbursements for my medical bills, Kyle's finger traced the deposit patterns. He was keeping half of everything and telling you we were just breaking even. The betrayal went deeper than adultery, deeper than abandonment. Howard had been systematically impoverishing his own family while building a secret fortune with his criminal girlfriend. But here's the really bad part, Kyle said, opening his laptop to show me what looked like real estate websites. They already bought a house in Mexico, not just a vacation, a permanent house. The property listing showed a luxury villa in Playa del Carmen with an infinity pool and ocean views. Purchase price, $340,000. Buyer information listed Howard Sykes and Jennifer Corvinus as co-owners. They used my surgery money as the down payment, Kyle said quietly. The bank transfer for $167,000 went directly to the Mexican real estate company. I stared at the screen, processing the magnitude of what Kyle had uncovered. Howard hadn't just stolen our savings for a romantic getaway. He'd used our son's medical fund to purchase foreign property with a woman who had a documented history of financial fraud. Kyle, what you've discovered here, it's not just theft. This is serious criminal activity. I know. Kyle closed the laptop and looked at me with those serious brown eyes. That's why I did something about it. What do you mean? I reported everything to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division yesterday. They have a website where you can submit evidence anonymously. Kyle's voice carried quiet satisfaction. I uploaded copies of all Dad's hidden accounts, all the emails with Jenny, and all the evidence about her stealing from old people. My 8-year-old son had just told me he'd initiated a federal investigation into his own father. Kyle, are you sure that was the right thing to do? Dad stole money meant to fix my spine so he could buy a house with a criminal. Yeah, Mom, I'm sure. The revelation that Kyle had contacted federal authorities left me speechless. I sat at our kitchen table, surrounded by evidence my 8-year-old had collected, trying to process that he'd launched a criminal investigation while I'd been focused on tissues and sleepless nights. Kyle, when you reported this to the FBI, what exactly did you tell them? Just the facts. He opened a composition notebook and showed me a handwritten draft. I said that someone was stealing money from a disabled child's medical fund and using it to buy property in Mexico with a person who has a history of financial fraud. His report was written in simple sentences, but covered every crucial detail: account numbers, transaction dates, evidence of premeditation. Kyle had documented everything with the thoroughness of someone who understood that details matter when seeking justice. But, sweetheart, didn't they ask questions about who you are, how you got this information? I submitted it through the anonymous tip portal. They don't need to know I'm 8. Kyle turned to a new page in his notebook. But that's not the only thing I did. My stomach clenched. What else? I called Bradford and Associates and reported Jenny for stealing from clients. Kyle's voice carried quiet satisfaction. I used the voice changer app on my tablet so I sounded like an adult. A voice changer app?
For online gaming, you can make yourself sound older or younger, Kyle demonstrated, speaking into his tablet. His 8-year-old voice transformed into something that could pass for a concerned adult.
I told them I was a family member of one of Jenny's elderly clients and that I'd discovered unauthorized transactions. The casual way he described sophisticated deception techniques terrified me. Where had my innocent little boy gone? Kyle, impersonating adults, filing false reports? Not false reports, true reports delivered anonymously. Kyle's logic remained unshakable. Everything I told them was completely accurate. I just didn't mention my age. He opened another folder labeled Results So Far. Inside were printed screenshots from Bradford and Associates website showing that Jenny Corvinus was no longer listed among their staff members. She got fired yesterday. Mr. Bradford called an emergency meeting after they started getting calls from worried clients. Kyle pointed to a screenshot of what appeared to be internal company communications. 3 families have already filed complaints about missing money from their investment accounts. How could you possibly know about internal company meetings? Jenny sent Dad an angry email about losing her job. She blamed some vindictive client for reporting her. Kyle scrolled through printed messages. Dad replied that they should stick to the original timeline and leave for Mexico anyway, but Jenny said she couldn't access their shared account anymore because her employment termination froze her banking privileges. I read the desperate exchanges between Howard and his now unemployed partner in crime. Their careful plans were unraveling, and they were starting to panic. But Kyle, if Jenny can't access money and her job is gone, how are they still planning to leave? They're not. Kyle smiled, and again I saw that sharp satisfaction that didn't belong on a child's face. Dad tried to book new flights yesterday using our emergency credit card, but I reported that card as compromised after I found evidence he'd been using it without permission. You got your father's credit cards canceled? I got stolen cards canceled. There's a difference. Kyle opened his laptop and showed me credit monitoring alerts. Dad has been using credit cards in my name since November. Did you know I supposedly have a $15,000 line of credit? The screen showed credit accounts I'd never seen before, all opened using Kyle's social security number and birthday, but with Howard listed as the primary cardholder. Identity theft, I whispered. Exactly. So I reported the fraud to all 3 credit agencies. They're conducting an investigation into unauthorized accounts opened using a minor's information. Kyle's typing brought up official fraud reports. Dad can't use those cards anymore because they've been flagged as criminal activity. I stared at the comprehensive protection my 8-year-old had built around our family's finances, while I'd been too devastated to function. Kyle, what you've accomplished here, it's incredible, but I'm worried about you having to carry this kind of burden. You're supposed to be playing with friends and worrying about homework, not conducting fraud investigations. Mom, kids with medical problems don't get to be normal anyway. Kyle's matter-of-fact acceptance of his circumstances broke my heart. I can't play sports because of my spine. I can't do sleepovers because of my back brace. I spend a lot of time on computers already. He closed the laptop and looked at me directly. Besides, someone had to protect us, and I'm good at this stuff. The quiet confidence in his voice was both inspiring and terrifying. My son had discovered abilities I never knew he possessed, skills that had saved us from complete financial ruin. What happens now? Now, Dad and Jenny realize that their plan isn't working, and they start making desperate mistakes. Kyle gathered his folders into a neat stack. People who panic do stupid things, and when they do stupid things, they leave more evidence. How do you know they're panicking? Kyle opened one final folder labeled Current Status. Inside were real-time screenshots of social media posts, email alerts, and what appeared to be monitored communications. Dad posted on Facebook yesterday asking if anyone knew a good lawyer. Jenny called in sick to a job she doesn't have anymore. They've been texting each other constantly since Tuesday, but their messages are getting shorter and more worried. I stared at the evidence of ongoing surveillance, realizing Kyle wasn't just documenting past crimes. He was actively monitoring his targets, watching their reactions in real time. Kyle, are you still reading their messages right now? Only when they send new ones. Dad's phone automatically forwards everything to an email account he doesn't know about. Kyle's fingers moved across his keyboard with surprising speed. I set up the forwarding rule 3 weeks ago when I first accessed his phone. My 8-year-old son had been conducting digital surveillance operations while other children his age were watching cartoons. Sweetheart, I need you to understand something. What you're doing, it's helping our family, but it's also changing you. I'm worried about what this kind of responsibility is doing to your childhood. Kyle looked at me with those serious brown eyes, considering my words carefully. Mom, childhood ended when Dad decided my surgery money was less important than his vacation house. The stark truth of his statement hit me like a physical blow. Kyle was right. Howard's betrayal had forced our 8-year-old into an adult world of criminal investigations and financial protection. But I'm okay, Kyle added, seeming to sense my distress. I'm not sad anymore. I'm just focused on making sure Dad can't hurt us again. And you're sure about what you're doing? About all these reports and investigations? Kyle nodded. Mom, Dad and Jenny stole from sick children and old people. They deserve consequences, and we deserve protection. The moral clarity in his voice was absolute. My son had processed complex adult betrayal through a framework of right and wrong that left no room for doubt or misplaced loyalty. What's next in your plan? Kyle smiled, and for the first time in days, it looked like my little boy again. Now, we wait for Dad to call, because when he realizes what's happening to his life, he's going to need someone to blame. The call came exactly when Kyle predicted it would, Tuesday afternoon at 2:47 p.m., while Kyle was at his weekly physical therapy appointment with Camille, our neighbor who'd volunteered to drive him when I couldn't leave work. I was restocking supplies at the dental clinic when my phone buzzed with Howard's name. My hands trembled as I stepped into the break room for privacy. Crystal, Howard's voice was different, strained, almost desperate. We need to talk. Something very weird is happening. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, remembering Kyle's calm prediction that his father would call when panic set in. What kind of weird? My bank accounts are frozen, all of them. They're saying there's some kind of federal investigation into unauthorized transfers. His words came out rushed, breathless. And Jenny? Crystal, Jenny lost her job yesterday. Security walked her out of the building. I should have felt surprised, but Kyle's careful preparation had already told me this was coming. I'm sorry to hear that. Sorry? Crystal, this isn't a coincidence. Someone is targeting us. Someone with serious computer skills. Howard's voice cracked. They've accessed my personal accounts, my work email, even my social media. Someone's systematically destroying my life. The irony wasn't lost on me. Howard was describing exactly what he'd done to Kyle and me, but he couldn't see the parallel. Who would do something like that? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Jenny thinks it might be someone from her old job, maybe a client she had to let go. Howard paused. Crystal, I need to ask you something directly. Did you hire someone, a private investigator or computer expert? Kyle's voice echoed in my memory. Now, we wait for Dad to figure out that his plan isn't working. My 8-year-old had predicted this conversation almost word for word. I didn't hire anyone, Howard. Then who? Because whoever did this, they know everything. Our travel plans, our financial arrangements, our personal communications. They've been watching us for weeks. I closed my eyes, picturing Kyle at his computer late at night, those careful fingers moving across the keyboard while I'd assumed he was playing games or chatting with friends. Howard, maybe you should focus on coming home and helping Kyle prepare for his surgery. That's another problem. The medical account, Crystal. Someone's filed fraud claims against those transfers. The bank has frozen everything pending investigation. I can't access Kyle's surgery money even if I wanted to return it. The desperation in his voice should have made me feel sorry for him. Instead, I felt proud. Kyle had locked down every avenue of escape his father might use. So Kyle's surgery fund is safe? It's frozen, not safe. If this investigation takes months, Kyle could miss his surgical window entirely. Howard's tone turned accusatory. Crystal, if you know who's doing this, you need to make them stop. Our son's health is at stake. The twisted logic staggered me. Howard was blaming unknown enemies for consequences that stemmed directly from his own theft. He'd created this crisis by stealing Kyle's medical money, but now he wanted to be rescued from the fallout. Where are you staying? That's another problem. Jenny's apartment lease got terminated. Something about unauthorized commercial activity in a residential property. We're in a hotel, but my credit cards aren't working either. I pictured Kyle's satisfied expression when he'd shown me the canceled travel reservations. My son hadn't just prevented their escape, he'd eliminated their comfortable landing spots. Maybe you should come home and we can figure this out together. I can't come home, Crystal, not yet. Jenny's father is flying in from Chicago tomorrow. He's bringing lawyers and private investigators to get to the bottom of this harassment campaign. Jenny's father? Dr. Martin Corvinus. He's a prominent physician with serious connections. He thinks someone is targeting Jenny specifically because of her access to client accounts at Bradford & Associates. I remembered Kyle's folder labeled Jenny's Secrets and all the court documents about her previous financial crimes. If Dr. Corvinus was investigating his daughter's situation, he was going to discover more than harassment. Howard, what if this isn't harassment? What if Jenny actually did something wrong? Don't be ridiculous. Jenny's never had access to client money. She's just Howard's administrative assistant. His voice turned defensive. Someone is framing her to get to me. The conversation was surreal. Howard was defending a woman whose criminal history Kyle had documented thoroughly, while simultaneously admitting he'd stolen from his disabled son. I need you to help me figure out who's behind this, Howard continued. Think about anyone who might have access to our financial information, anyone who might want to hurt us. Us? Even in crisis, Howard couldn't acknowledge that he'd destroyed his own family before any outside enemy had arrived. I don't know anyone with those kinds of computer skills. Well, someone does, and they're not just targeting me, Crystal. They know about Kyle's medical condition, our family finances, our home address. Whoever this is, they've been studying us. After Howard hung up, I sat in the clinic break room processing what I'd heard. My husband was living in a hotel with his unemployed secretary, surrounded by frozen accounts and canceled plans, while their secret life crumbled around them. Meanwhile, Kyle was at physical therapy, probably discussing muscle-strengthening exercises with his therapist while mentally planning the next phase of his campaign against his father. The dichotomy was staggering. The adult had created chaos and was drowning in consequences he couldn't understand. The child had created order and was systematically protecting his family with skills no one knew he possessed. That evening, I picked Kyle up from therapy and drove home in silence. He seemed relaxed, even cheerful, asking about my day at work and commenting on the spring flowers beginning to bloom along our street. "How was therapy?" I asked. "Better. My flexibility is improving. Mrs. Lisa says the surgery will be much easier if I keep my range of motion up before the procedure." Kyle spoke about his upcoming surgery with calm confidence, like it was definitely happening, despite our empty bank accounts. "Kyle, we need to talk about the money situation. Dr. Morrison's office called today asking about the prepayment schedule. Did you tell them Dad stole it?" I said we were having some temporary financial difficulties. Kyle nodded thoughtfully. "Don't worry about the money, Mom. Dad's going to give it back." "Sweetheart, Dad can't even access his own accounts right now." "I know." Kyle's smile returned, sharp and satisfied. The certainty in his voice sent chills down my spine. Kyle wasn't hoping his father would return the money. He wasn't even planning to ask for it back. He was stating a fact about something that hadn't happened yet, with the same confidence he'd shown when predicting Howard's panicked phone call. My 8-year-old son was 3 steps ahead of everyone else, including me. Wednesday evening, Kyle was helping me prepare dinner when Howard's second call came. Kyle was carefully stirring soup on the stove, moving slowly to avoid straining his back, when my phone rang with that familiar number I'd been dreading. "Crystal, thank God you answered." Howard's voice was ragged, barely controlled. "Something terrible is happening. Someone's been inside my computer. They're accessing my accounts in real time." I glanced at Kyle, who continued stirring soup with steady, methodical motions. His expression remained perfectly calm, but I noticed he'd angled himself to hear the conversation. "What do you mean, inside your computer?" "I'm watching it happen right now. My email inbox is opening and closing by itself. Someone's reading my messages while I'm trying to type them." Howard's breathing was audible through the phone. "Crystal, they just sent an email from my account to my boss. I didn't write it." Kyle set down the wooden spoon and walked to the kitchen table, where his laptop sat open to what appeared to be homework assignments. But I noticed multiple tabs were running in the background. What did the email say? "I can't tell you over the phone, but Crystal, whoever's doing this, they have access to everything. My personal files, my work documents, my communications with Jenny." Howard's voice dropped to a whisper. "They're posting things on my social media accounts. Financial documents, private messages, things that were supposed to be confidential." Kyle opened a new browser tab and began typing with surprising speed. His small fingers moved across the keyboard like he'd been programming for years, not weeks. "Howard, you need to contact the police if someone's hacking your accounts." I tried that. The detective said if the information being posted is true, then it's not harassment, it's evidence disclosure. Howard's panic was escalating. But how would anyone have access to true information unless they were actually inside my systems? The realization was hitting him slowly. Someone wasn't posting fake accusations about his activities. Someone was sharing real evidence of his crimes. "Crystal, I need you to understand something. The money I transferred, I was planning to return it all after Jenny's investment opportunity paid off. Her father has connections in medical equipment. We were going to get Kyle's surgery done at cost and surprise you with the savings." Kyle looked up from his laptop, and I saw something in his expression I'd never witnessed before. Not anger or hurt, but cold calculation. He was listening to his father construct elaborate justifications for stealing from his own disabled child. "Howard, that's not how medical decisions work. You can't gamble with our son's surgery money on investment schemes." It wasn't gambling. Jenny's father is Dr. Martin Corvinus. He owns medical equipment companies across Central America. This was a guaranteed return. Kyle closed his laptop with a soft click and walked to where I was standing. He gently took the phone from my hand. "Hi, Dad." "Kyle, buddy, thank God. Kyle, some very bad people are doing terrible things to Daddy and Jenny. They're trying to make us look like criminals." "You are criminals." Kyle's voice remained conversational, like he was discussing his school day. "You stole $167,000 from my surgery fund and used it to buy a house in Mexico." The silence on Howard's end stretched for nearly 15 seconds. "Kyle, who told you that?" "Nobody told me. I found out myself." Kyle sat down at the kitchen table, still holding the phone with complete composure. "Along with copies of the forged medical documents where you tried to transfer my care to an unlicensed clinic in Tijuana. That's impossible. You're 8 years old. You couldn't possibly understand those kinds of documents." "I understand that you committed medical fraud by forging Dr. Morrison's signature on transfer forms. I understand that Jenny embezzled money from elderly clients at Bradford & Associates. I understand that you both plan to disappear to Mexico and leave Mom responsible for debts you created using my social security number." Each accusation was delivered in Kyle's matter-of-fact tone, like he was reciting multiplication tables. "Kyle, listen to me very carefully. Adults sometimes make complicated financial decisions that children can't fully understand. What looks wrong to you might actually be. I have copies of everything, Dad." Kyle's interruption was gentle but firm. "Every email between you and Jenny, every forged document, every illegal transaction. I've been monitoring your communications for 3 weeks." "You've been monitoring me?" "Kyle, what does that mean?" "It means I know about the second phone you hid in your car. I know about the fake investment accounts Jenny created to hide stolen client money. I know about the Mexico house you bought using my surgery fund as collateral. Kyle's voice never wavered, never showed emotion. He was presenting facts like a prosecutor laying out evidence. And I know that when the FBI started investigating, Jenny stopped returning your calls. The sound that came through the phone was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Kyle, please, I know I made mistakes, but I'm still your father. I love you. I love your mother. I never meant for things to go this far. You chose Jenny over us, Dad. You chose money over your family. You chose to steal my medical fund to pay for your new life. Kyle's tone remained factual, without accusation or emotion. Actions have consequences. You taught me that when you walked out of our house. I'm begging you, whatever you've done, whatever you know, please just stop. I have nothing left. I'm living in my car because I can't pass credit checks to rent an apartment. I can't get a job because every background search shows financial fraud alerts. Kyle looked at me as he spoke his final words to his father. You taught me something important, Dad. You taught me that people who are supposed to protect you sometimes don't, so you have to protect yourself. And with that, he hung up the phone. The silence that followed was absolute. Kyle set the phone on the counter and looked at me with those calm, serious eyes. He won't call back, he said matter-of-factly. How do you know? Because now he knows I'm watching, and he knows that every move he makes, I'll see coming. Kyle picked up his laptop and headed toward his room. I have homework to finish. I stood alone in my kitchen, finally understanding that my 8-year-old son had just systematically destroyed a grown man's entire life, and that Howard deserved every consequence he was facing. But I also understood that Kyle had paid a price for this victory. The child who'd protected us wasn't the same innocent boy who'd eaten cereal and worried about spelling tests just weeks ago. The question that haunted me was whether the person Kyle was becoming was worth celebrating or mourning. I stood in our kitchen long after Kyle had disappeared into his room, staring at the phone in my hands. My 8-year-old son had just delivered judgment on his father with the calm precision most children use to recite multiplication tables. The silence felt heavy, almost oppressive. Part of me wanted to feel guilty. Part of me wanted to march into Kyle's room and demand he undo whatever digital warfare he'd unleashed. But a larger part of me, a part I wasn't sure I recognized, felt fierce pride. Kyle had protected us when I'd been too devastated to protect myself. The next morning, Kyle appeared at breakfast looking exactly like any other third grader preparing for school. He ate his oatmeal, checked his homework folder, and adjusted his back brace with practiced efficiency. As if he hadn't spent the previous evening systematically destroying 2 adults' lives. Kyle, wait. I caught his arm gently as he headed for the door. Are you okay? He tilted his head, considering the question with that serious expression I'd grown to know so well. I'm fine, Mom. Why wouldn't I be? Because of what happened yesterday with your father. What about it? His complete lack of emotional response unnerved me. Honey, you just had a very intense conversation with Dad. It's normal to feel upset or confused or angry. I'm not upset. Kyle adjusted his backpack straps carefully, distributing the weight to avoid pressure on his spine. I'm relieved. Now Dad knows that I know what he did, and he knows there are consequences for stealing from his family. But don't you miss him? Even a little? Kyle paused at the front door, his small hand on the doorknob. I miss the dad I thought he was, but that person was never real, was he? He was just pretending to love us when it was convenient. The matter-of-fact way he analyzed his own feelings terrified me. Where was the confusion, the desperate hope that maybe Daddy would apologize and come home? Where was the normal 8-year-old who should be devastated by his father's abandonment? Kyle, I think it would be good for you to talk to someone, a counselor who can help you work through these big emotions. I'm not having big emotions, Mom. I'm having appropriate emotions. He opened the door, letting in the cool morning air. But if it makes you feel better, I don't mind talking to someone. After Kyle left for school, I called our pediatrician's office. Dr. Wesley Bradford recommended a child psychologist named Dr. Lisa Wells, who specialized in family trauma and gifted children. Gifted children often process difficult situations differently than their peers, Dr. Bradford explained. They might intellectualize emotions rather than experiencing them in traditional ways. Given Kyle's medical condition and the stress he's already learned to manage, his response might be more adaptive than concerning. Dr. Wells could see Kyle the following week, but in the meantime, I found myself studying my son like he was a puzzle I needed to solve. He maintained his normal routine, school, homework, physical therapy, but there were subtle changes I hadn't noticed before. He'd taken over monitoring our household expenses completely, creating detailed spreadsheets that tracked my reduced income and projected our costs for the next 6 months. He'd researched legal aid services and compiled information about medical payment plans and surgical financing options. "Mom, you need to call Dr. Morrison's office tomorrow," he told me one evening while I was sorting through medical bills. "Every day we delay gives the insurance company more time to find reasons to deny coverage." "Kyle, these are grown-up concerns. You don't need to worry about—" "Someone has to worry about them." He sat down across from me at the kitchen table. "You're sad, which makes sense, but not productive right now. I'm not sad, so I can think clearly about what needs to happen next." His clinical assessment of my mental state stung because it was completely accurate. I had been wallowing, hoping somehow this nightmare would resolve itself without requiring difficult decisions or painful conversations. Kyle was the only one taking concrete steps to secure our future. That night, I heard him on his computer again, but this time the sound was different. Instead of rapid typing, I heard his voice, quiet, patient, explaining something to someone else. I crept to his bedroom door and listened. "I know it's scary discovering that your parents have been lying about money," he was saying, "but you're going to be okay. The important thing is to collect evidence before you tell any adults." I realized Kyle was talking to another child, probably someone whose family was being destroyed the same way ours had been. My son had become a resource for other children whose parents had betrayed them. "Remember, adults don't always protect kids the way they're supposed to," Kyle continued, his voice gentle but certain. "Sometimes kids have to protect themselves, and that's okay. You're not responsible for your parents' bad choices." I walked away from his door with tears in my eyes, not from sadness, but from overwhelming pride mixed with heartbreak. Howard had tried to break us, but instead he'd forged something unbreakable. Kyle had transformed his pain into purpose, his medical vulnerability into strategic strength. The next morning, Kyle appeared at breakfast looking like any other 8-year-old. But I knew better now. Underneath that normal exterior was someone extraordinary, someone who'd taken the worst betrayal imaginable and turned it into a mission to protect other families. "Ready for school?" I asked, kissing his forehead. "Always," he said, shouldering his backpack. "Oh, and Mom, I love you." "I love you too, sweetheart." As I watched him walk carefully to the bus stop, his posture straight despite the weight of his medical brace, I realized that Howard's betrayal hadn't destroyed our family. It had revealed what we were truly made of. Kyle had won more than justice against his father. He'd won control over his own life and was using that power to help other children do the same. Dr. Lisa Wells's office was decorated in calming pastels, with children's artwork covering one wall and shelves lined with books about child development. I expected Kyle to be nervous about his first therapy session, but he walked in like he was attending a routine medical appointment. "Kyle, I'm Dr. Wells. Your mom thought it might be helpful for us to chat about the changes happening in your family." "That makes sense. I understand this is probably required after what I did to my father." Dr. Wells blinked, clearly not expecting such directness from an 8-year-old. "Can you tell me about that?" For the next 30 minutes, Kyle calmly explained the entire situation. He described discovering Howard's affair, documenting the financial crimes, and systematically dismantling his father's escape plans. He spoke without visible emotion, presenting facts like he was giving an oral report for school. How did that make you feel? Dr. Wells asked. Satisfied, Kyle replied immediately. He stole from me, so I made sure there were consequences. It felt like justice. Do you ever feel sad about your father leaving? I feel sad that he chose to become the kind of person who steals from his disabled child, but I don't feel sad about him facing the results of that choice. Dr. Wells took careful notes, her expression shifting between professional interest and barely concealed amazement. Kyle, can you tell me about your medical condition and how it affects your daily life? I have thoracic scoliosis. My spine curves sideways, which makes it hard to breathe sometimes and causes back pain. I need surgery to correct it, or eventually my lungs won't work properly. Kyle adjusted his position in the chair, demonstrating the careful movements I'd watched him make for years. The surgery costs $180,000, which Dad stole to buy a house with his criminal girlfriend. How do you know Jenny is a criminal? Kyle pulled out a manila folder he'd brought with him. Public records show she's been fired from 3 accounting firms for embezzlement. She's currently under federal investigation for defrauding elderly clients. Dr. Wells examined the documents Kyle handed her, her eyebrows rising steadily as she read. Kyle, how did you learn to research this kind of information? Mrs. Smith at the school library taught me about public databases for our career research project. I was studying computer security specialists, which led me to learning about financial crime investigation. And you applied those research skills to your own family situation? Yes. When I realized Dad was lying about where our money was going, I wanted to understand who he was really protecting. Kyle's voice remained matter-of-fact. Turns out he was protecting a thief. When the session ended, Dr. Wells asked to speak with me privately while Kyle waited in the lobby. Mrs. Sykes, your son is remarkable, Dr. Wells began carefully. His cognitive abilities are exceptional, and his emotional resilience is extraordinary. But is it healthy? Should a child be able to do what he did without feeling traumatized or guilty? Trauma responses vary widely, especially in children with chronic medical conditions. Kyle has already learned to manage pain, uncertainty, and complex medical decisions. He's applied those coping skills to this family crisis. Dr. Wells leaned forward. Some children fall apart when faced with betrayal and abandonment. Others, particularly those with strong analytical skills and existing experience managing difficult circumstances, respond by taking control of their environment. So he's okay? He's more than okay. He's adapted. Dr. Wells closed her notes. The question is whether you're comfortable with who he's becoming. That evening, I found Kyle in his room, but instead of surveillance software or financial documents, his laptop screen showed a Word document titled, How Kids Can Protect Themselves When Parents Make Bad Choices. What's this, sweetheart? I'm writing a guide for other children whose parents might be stealing from them or lying about money. Kyle scrolled down to show me detailed sections about recognizing warning signs, protecting personal information, and knowing when to ask for help. Mrs. Wells asked me to present this to the school counselors next month. The document was sophisticated, clearly written, and incredibly thorough. Kyle was transforming his traumatic experience into educational content that could protect other families. Where did you learn to write like this? I've been researching family financial fraud for weeks. You'd be surprised how common it is. Kyle saved the document. 3 other kids at school have parents going through divorces involving hidden money. I stared at the screen, reading his practical, compassionate advice for children facing adult betrayal. Kyle wasn't just surviving what Howard had done to us, he was using his experience to build something that could protect others. 2 weeks after Kyle's confrontation with Howard, something unexpected happened. Kyle received an email from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division thanking their anonymous informant for providing evidence that had led to a major breakthrough in a multi-state embezzlement investigation. Mom, look at this, Kyle said, showing me the official message on his laptop screen. They recovered money for 12 families who were victims of Jenny's investment scams. The email listed recovered amounts: $89,000 for the Martinez family in Arizona, $156,000 for elderly clients in Oregon, $203,000 for a disabled veterans family in Texas. Kyle's evidence had triggered an investigation that was returning stolen money to families across the country. Sweetheart, this is incredible. You helped all these people get their money back. It felt like the right thing to do. Kyle closed the laptop and looked at me seriously. Mrs. Wells said I should think about how to use what happened to us for something positive. That afternoon, Kyle asked me to drive him to the Riverside Public Library. I want to talk to Mrs. Smith about starting a computer safety program for kids. Mrs. Smith, the librarian who'd taught Kyle his research skills, listened with growing amazement as Kyle explained her proposal. I want to teach other children how to recognize when adults are lying about money, Kyle said, his small voice steady and confident, and how to protect themselves if their parents start stealing from them. Kyle, that's a wonderful idea. We've had 3 families come to us in the past month asking for help with similar situations. Mrs. Smith pulled out a folder from her desk. Would you be willing to create some educational materials we could share? That evening, Kyle worked on his laptop with renewed energy. Instead of surveillance programs or financial monitoring, his screen showed colorful presentations designed for children. Financial safety for kids, warning signs and protection. What to do when adults break money rules. How to ask for help when family members lie. This is amazing, Kyle. Where did you learn to create presentations like this? School computer lab and YouTube tutorials. Mrs. Wells helped me understand how to explain complicated things in simple ways. Kyle added cartoon illustrations to his slides. I want other kids to know they're not helpless if their parents do bad things. The presentations were sophisticated but age-appropriate, with clear instructions and friendly graphics. Kyle had found a way to transform his trauma into education that could protect other children. I'm scheduling the first workshop for next Saturday morning, he told me, saving his work. Mrs. Smith posted flyers around town. 17 families have already signed up.
Are you nervous about teaching adults? A little, but Mrs. Wells said that sometimes kids understand things better than grown-ups because we haven't learned to ignore obvious problems yet. Saturday morning arrived bright and early. Kyle wore his best school clothes and carried a presentation folder with the same seriousness he brought to medical appointments. The library's community room was packed with parents and children, many looking as desperate and confused as I'd felt weeks earlier. Kyle stood at the front of the room, barely tall enough to see over the podium Mrs. Smith had adjusted for his height. But when he began speaking, his voice carried clear authority. Hi everyone, my name is Kyle, and my dad stole my surgery money to buy a house with his girlfriend. I'm here to teach you how to stop that from happening to your family. The room fell silent. Parents leaned forward, children sat straighter, everyone focused completely on the small boy with the back brace who spoke about financial crime like other kids discussed video games. For the next hour, Kyle presented his research with professional confidence. He explained warning signs, protection strategies, and resources for reporting financial abuse. He answered questions from adults with patience and clarity that left them visibly impressed. Remember, Kyle concluded, adults are supposed to protect children, not steal from them. When they don't do their job, we have to protect ourselves, and that's not our fault. The applause was immediate and sustained. Parents approached Kyle afterward, asking for his materials and requesting follow-up sessions. Several families exchanged contact information, forming support networks for financial recovery. Kyle, that was incredible, Mrs. Smith said as we cleaned up afterward. You've started something really important here. Kyle carefully packed his presentation materials. It feels good helping people understand what I learned the hard way. As we drove home, I watched my son in the rearview mirror. The child who'd been victimized had become an advocate for other victims. Howard's betrayal had created something powerful and positive that was already spreading beyond our family. How do you feel about today? I asked. Proud, Kyle said simply, and excited for next week's session. Kyle had discovered that his greatest strength wasn't revenge against those who'd hurt him, but protection for those who might be hurt next. The national conference took place 6 weeks later in Chicago, and Kyle presented his research to an audience of child psychologists, family attorneys, and financial crime investigators. I watched from the back of the conference hall as my 8-year-old son stood at a podium designed for adults, his voice clear and confident through the wireless microphone. Financial abuse within families affects approximately 2.1 million American households annually, Kyle began, reading from notes he'd prepared. Children are particularly vulnerable because they trust adult family members to protect their interests. The audience of professionals listened with rapt attention as Kyle explained his research methodology, his protection strategies, and the warning signs other children should watch for. His presentation included case studies from families he'd helped through his library workshops, all anonymized to protect their privacy. Questions from the audience, Kyle asked at the end of his presentation. A woman in the front row raised her hand. Kyle, how do you recommend children balance protecting themselves with maintaining family relationships? Kyle considered the question seriously. If someone is stealing from you or lying to you, the relationship is already broken. Protecting yourself doesn't damage anything real. After his presentation, Kyle was approached by representatives from 3 different organizations. A children's advocacy group offered him a position on their youth advisory board. A financial literacy nonprofit wanted to incorporate his educational materials into their national curriculum. A cybersecurity firm specializing in family protection requested permission to adapt his research for their client training programs. These are incredible opportunities, I told Kyle as we reviewed the offers in our hotel room that evening. They are, but I need to make sure any partnership actually helps families instead of just making money off their problems. Kyle's careful evaluation of each offer showed wisdom that impressed even the adults who'd made them. He understood instinctively that his work had value and that he shouldn't give it away without ensuring it would be used responsibly. The financial literacy nonprofit offered the best partnership. They would pay Kyle $500 per month to develop educational content and provide a full scholarship to any college he chose when he graduated high school. In return, Kyle's materials would be distributed to libraries, schools, and community centers nationwide.
This could reach thousands of families, Kyle said, reading through their proposal, and the monthly payments will help us catch up on medical expenses. Are you sure you want to commit to something this long-term? You're only 8 years old. Kyle looked at me with those serious brown eyes. Mom, I found something I'm good at that helps people. Why wouldn't I want to keep doing it? 2 months later, Kyle's surgery was scheduled for the originally planned date. The combination of his workshop donations, the nonprofit partnership payments, and a medical financing plan had covered the full cost. Dr. Morrison's office worked with us to ensure Kyle received the exact care he needed at the specialized facility we'd always planned to use. The night before surgery, Kyle received an unexpected package. Inside was a letter from the FBI's Victim Services Division and a check for $167,000. Recovered stolen funds from the Corvinus investigation, Kyle read aloud. Due to your evidence contribution, these funds have been identified as belonging to the Kyle Sykes Medical Fund and are being returned to the rightful account holder. I stared at the check. Our original surgery money, returned in full. Kyle, this means you could cancel the payment plan, keep the workshop donations for other projects, and still have money left over for follow-up treatments. I know, Kyle folded the letter carefully. It also means other families got their money back too. The FBI said they recovered over $2.3 million total from Jenny's various schemes. How do you feel about seeing your father's name in the federal case files? Kyle considered this question carefully, as he did everything else. I feel sad that he chose to become the kind of person who appears in federal case files, but I don't feel sad that there were consequences for his choices. The surgery was successful. Kyle's spine was straightened, his breathing improved, and his pain decreased significantly. During his recovery, he continued developing educational materials from his hospital bed, creating new presentations about medical fraud and insurance protection. Kyle, you're supposed to be resting and healing. I am healing, and helping other families makes me feel better. Kyle adjusted his position carefully, still managing pain, but with hope for a future without constant discomfort. Besides, I got 3 more emails this week from kids who stopped their parents from stealing money using what I taught them. The impact of Kyle's work continued expanding. His library workshops had grown into monthly community events. His educational materials were being used in schools across 12 states. And the partnership with the financial literacy nonprofit had developed into a full youth program with Kyle as the youngest advisor in their organization's history. Do you ever regret what you had to do? The investigation, the reports, everything that happened with your father? Kyle shook his head without hesitation. I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret protecting our family or helping other families protect themselves. As I watched my son heal physically while continuing to grow as an advocate for other vulnerable children, I realized Howard's betrayal had revealed something remarkable about Kyle's character. Not just intelligence or technical ability, but an unshakable commitment to justice that guided everything he did. 6 months after Kyle's surgery, we received an email that changed our perspective on his future entirely. Secure Family Technologies, a cybersecurity company specializing in financial protection, had somehow identified Kyle as the anonymous informant in the Corvinus case and wanted to offer him an unprecedented opportunity. They're offering me a full scholarship to any university I want, plus a guaranteed position in their youth development program, Kyle explained, showing me the official letter on his laptop. Starting salary would be $85,000 a year after graduation. I stared at the numbers on the screen, calculated for a career that wouldn't begin for another decade. Kyle, this is incredible. This could set you up for life. I know. Kyle closed the laptop without hesitation. I'm turning it down. What? Why? Kyle walked to our living room window, his posture straight and pain-free for the first time since I could remember. The surgery had been successful beyond our hopes, and his recovery had progressed faster than Dr. Morrison had predicted. They want to own what I create. They want me to build security software that makes money off people's fear instead of actually protecting them. Kyle turned back to me. Besides, I already have a job. What do you mean? Kyle pulled out a business card from his school folder. It looked professionally designed with clean typography and contact information. Kay Sykes, Family Financial Protection Consultant. Kyle, you're 8 years old. How are you running a consulting business? Age doesn't matter when you're working online and helping families solve real problems. Kyle opened his laptop to show me a spreadsheet tracking his income. I have 11 regular clients now, and they pay me $40 per hour for consultations and custom protection plans. The numbers were staggering. In just 6 months, Kyle had earned more than I made in 4 months at the dental clinic. What kind of services do you provide? I help families identify financial vulnerabilities, secure their digital accounts, and create protection protocols for their children's funds. Kyle scrolled through client testimonials. Last month, I helped a family in Oregon discover that their teenage son was using his grandmother's credit cards for online gambling. We recovered $18,000 before it became a bigger problem. Is it legal? Everything I do is completely legal. I teach people how to protect themselves and help them file appropriate reports with authorities when crimes have been committed. Kyle minimized the spreadsheet. I'm also speaking at 3 more conferences this year, and the American Library Association wants me to develop a national curriculum for child financial literacy. As yourself? As Kay Sykes, Family Protection Specialist. When I participate in video conferences, my age isn't immediately obvious, and by the time people realize I'm a child, they've already seen that my methods work. That evening, I found myself reading news coverage of Kyle's impact online. The Corvinus case had become a landmark investigation, referenced in financial crime training programs, and cited in congressional hearings about elder abuse protection. Comment sections were filled with stories from families who'd used Kyle's educational materials to protect themselves. Parents sharing how their children had identified financial red flags. Adults describing how they'd learned to recognize embezzlement schemes targeting their elderly relatives. One comment thread caught my attention. Does anyone know who the anonymous informant was in the Corvinus case? I'd like to thank them personally. Their evidence saved my family's entire retirement fund. Kyle had triggered a nationwide conversation about family financial protection, But nobody suspected the hero they wanted to thank was a 9-year-old boy recovering from spinal surgery. Kyle, do you ever want people to know it was you who exposed Jennifer Corvinus? No, the work matters more than getting credit for it. Kyle saved his latest educational presentation. Besides, if people knew my age, they'd focus on that instead of learning how to protect themselves. What's next for your consulting work? The financial literacy nonprofit wants me to develop materials specifically for children with medical conditions. Families dealing with disability often have complex financial needs that make them vulnerable to exploitation. Are you drawing from personal experience? Kyle nodded. Dad's plan to send me to an unlicensed clinic in Mexico taught me a lot about medical tourism scams. I want other families to recognize those red flags before they trust their children's health to unqualified providers. As I watched Kyle work that evening, developing materials that could protect children facing medical crises similar to his own, I realized something profound had emerged from our family's worst nightmare. Howard had tried to steal Kyle's future to fund his own escape. Instead, he'd revealed capabilities in our son that were now protecting families across the country. Kyle had transformed personal trauma into a mission that was growing larger every day. 1 year after Howard's departure, Kyle received an email that neither of us expected. The sender was listed as mcorvinus@chicagolegal.com, and the subject line read, "Regarding my daughter Jennifer, request for meeting." "Kyle, this is from Dr. Martin Corvinus," I said, reading over his shoulder. "Jenny's father." Kyle opened the message with his usual calm composure. The letter was formal but personal. "Dear Mr. Sykes, I have spent considerable time investigating the circumstances that led to my daughter's federal indictment. Through this process, I discovered that the anonymous evidence which exposed her crimes came from someone protecting a child's medical fund. I would like to meet with you to discuss restitution and to personally apologize for my daughter's actions." "He wants to meet with you," I said, processing the implications. "Kyle, this could be dangerous. What if he's angry about what happened to Jenny?"
He's not angry, he's ashamed. Kyle pulled up a folder on his desktop labeled Corvinus Family Research. Dr. Corvinus didn't know about Jenny's criminal history. He thought she was a legitimate accountant. When the FBI investigation revealed everything she'd done, he learned his daughter had been lying to him for years. Kyle showed me newspaper articles about Dr. Corvinus establishing a victim restitution fund, liquidating assets to compensate families affected by Jenny's embezzlement schemes. He's trying to make things right for everyone Jenny hurt, including us. What do you think we should do? Meet with him. But here. Kyle closed the laptop. I want to control the environment and make sure this conversation happens on our terms. The meeting took place the following Saturday in our living room. Dr. Martin Corvinus arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the sort of expensive suit that suggested serious financial resources. He was a distinguished man in his 60s, with gray hair and kind eyes that showed genuine remorse. When Kyle entered the room, Dr. Corvinus studied him with obvious surprise. "You're much younger than I expected," Dr. Corvinus said quietly. "Age doesn't change what your daughter did to my family," Kyle replied, settling carefully into his chair with the automatic adjustments he still made to protect his healing spine. "No, it doesn't, but it makes your response even more remarkable." Dr. Corvinus opened his briefcase. "Kyle, I've spent months trying to understand how someone your age could have conducted such a thorough investigation of complex financial crimes. Adults underestimate children. That made the investigation easier." Dr. Corvinus pulled out several documents. "I'm here to offer complete restitution for my daughter's crimes against your family, plus additional compensation for the trauma you've endured." Kyle examined the papers without emotion. They included a check for $50,000 beyond the already recovered surgery funds, a college scholarship fund established in Kyle's name, and a formal partnership offer for Kyle's educational work. "I appreciate the gesture, Dr. Corvinus, but I need to understand your motivations. My daughter destroyed families while I was funding her comfortable lifestyle, completely unaware of her criminal activities. I bear responsibility for enabling her crimes through my financial support." Kyle set the documents aside.
What happened to Jenny? Federal prison. 18 months for financial fraud plus restitution requirements that will take her years to fulfill. Dr. Corvinus's voice carried genuine pain. She'll also never be eligible to work in financial services again. And my father? Howard received probation and community service because he cooperated fully with the investigation. He's currently working at a hardware store in Tampa, living in a small apartment, and paying court-ordered restitution to various victims. Kyle absorbed this information with characteristic calm. So there were consequences for both of them. Significant consequences. Kyle, what you accomplished, it was extraordinary, but it was also the work of someone who should never have been forced into that position. Kyle looked at Dr. Corvinus directly. Adults failed to protect me, so I protected myself. I don't regret that choice. Neither do I, which is why I'd like to support your continued work helping other families. The partnership with Dr. Corvinus transformed our lives in ways I hadn't anticipated. Kyle accepted his offer to fund a national family protection initiative, but with conditions that demonstrated wisdom beyond his years. I want the program to be free for families in crisis, Kyle told Dr. Corvinus during our follow-up meeting. No one should have to pay to learn how to protect themselves from financial abuse. Dr. Corvinus agreed immediately, establishing the Kyle Sykes Family Protection Foundation with an initial funding of $500,000. Kyle would direct the educational content while Dr. Corvinus provided legal and financial oversight. This foundation will help thousands of families, Dr. Corvinus said, reviewing Kyle's detailed proposal. Your materials are already being used in 43 libraries across 8 states. Kyle's recovery from surgery had been remarkable. His spine was straight, his breathing unrestricted, and his energy levels had improved dramatically. But more importantly, his sense of purpose had crystallized into something that amazed everyone who worked with him. Kyle received another college scholarship offer yesterday, I told Dr. Corvinus, from MIT's computer science program. They want to reserve a spot for him now, with full tuition coverage. That's wonderful, Dr. Corvinus said. What was Kyle's response? Kyle looked up from the foundation documents he was reviewing. I told them I'd consider it, but only if they'd let me develop family protection technologies instead of corporate security systems. The maturity in his negotiating approach impressed even experienced adults. Kyle understood his value and wasn't willing to compromise his mission for prestigious opportunities that didn't align with his goals. Have you heard anything more about Howard's situation? Dr. Corvinus asked carefully. He's working at Bradford Hardware in Tampa, Kyle said without emotion. He pays $400 monthly in restitution to Jenny's victims and lives in a studio apartment. His probation officer sends progress reports to the court every month. Does he ever try to contact you? He sends birthday cards and Christmas cards, always with the same message about being sorry and hoping we can rebuild our relationship someday. Kyle closed the foundation folder. I don't respond. Do you think you'll ever want a relationship with your father again? Kyle considered the question with his usual thoughtfulness. Maybe, when I'm an adult, if he demonstrates genuine understanding of what he did wrong. But trust has to be earned back through actions, not just words. The conversation shifted to Kyle's upcoming presentation at the National Child Advocacy Conference. He would be the youngest speaker in the conference's history, presenting research about financial abuse patterns in families with medical expenses. Are you nervous about addressing such a large audience? A little, but these are people who work to protect children professionally. They'll understand why this information matters. As we prepared to leave Dr. Corvinus's office, Kyle asked a question that surprised us both. Dr. Corvinus, do you think your daughter will ever understand what she did wrong? Dr. Corvinus considered carefully. I hope so, Kyle, but understanding requires accepting responsibility, and Jenny has spent most of her life blaming others for her choices. Kyle nodded. That's what I thought. Some people change when they face consequences. Others just get better at hiding what they're really like. Walking to our car, I realized Kyle had developed not just technical skills or advocacy abilities, but profound wisdom about human nature and personal accountability. How do you feel about everything that's happened this year? I asked. Grateful, Kyle said simply. Dad's betrayal was terrible, but it taught me that I'm stronger than I thought, and it showed me work that matters. Kyle had discovered that his greatest power wasn't punishing people who'd hurt him, but preventing others from being hurt in the first place. 2 years later, I was organizing files in our new home office when I found something that stopped me cold. Tucked inside Kyle's old homework folder was a handwritten letter, dated the day after Howard had left us. Dear future me, it began in Kyle's careful third-grade handwriting. Dad stole our money and left us alone. I'm scared, but I'm going to fix this. I promise. I'll protect Mom and make sure other kids don't get hurt like this. I hope when you read this letter, you'll be proud of what we did. I sat in our comfortable home office, funded by Kyle's consulting work and foundation partnerships, reading my 9-year-old son's promise to himself. He'd kept every word. Kyle appeared in the doorway, now 10 years old and standing straight without any medical equipment. His surgery had been completely successful, his spine perfectly aligned, his breathing clear and strong. Mom, what's that? I handed him the letter. Kyle read it with the same serious expression he brought to everything, then looked at me with those intelligent eyes that had guided us through our darkest period. Do you think you kept your promise? I asked. The protecting part? Yes. The other kids' part? Definitely. Kyle folded the letter carefully. But I learned something I didn't expect when I wrote this. What's that? That protecting people isn't just about stopping bad things from happening to them. It's about teaching them how to protect themselves. Kyle's foundation had grown into a national organization with chapters in 37 states. His educational materials were used in schools, libraries, and community centers from coast to coast. Hundreds of families had prevented financial fraud using strategies Kyle had developed. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Dad hadn't stolen the money, if our family had stayed together? Kyle considered this question as thoughtfully as he considered everything. I think I would have grown up not knowing how strong I actually am, and a lot of families would still be vulnerable to people like Jenny because no one would have exposed her crimes. Do you think Dad's betrayal was worth everything that came after? Worth it isn't the right question, Mom. What happened, happened. The only thing that matters is what we did with it. Kyle smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd found peace with difficult truths. We turned the worst thing that ever happened to us into something that protects other families. That feels right. That evening, Kyle was working on his latest project when I asked him one final question that had been weighing on my mind. Kyle, do you think you'll ever forgive your father? He stopped typing and looked at me directly. I already have forgiven him, Mom. Not because he deserves it, but because carrying anger takes energy away from helping people. But you still don't want a relationship with him. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean trusting someone who's shown you who they really are. Kyle saved his work. Dad made his choices. Now he has to live with them, but those choices don't get to control our lives anymore. As I tucked Kyle into bed that night, I realized that Howard's betrayal had revealed something extraordinary about our family's resilience. We hadn't just survived his abandonment and theft, we'd built something meaningful from the wreckage. Kyle had transformed personal trauma into a national movement that was protecting vulnerable families every day. Howard could keep whatever remained of his diminished life in Florida. We'd built something infinitely more valuable from the pieces he'd left behind. We'd built hope, and Kyle was sharing it with the world.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.